He divorced her to save his empire. She left to save their child. Years later, a little girl with his eyes looked up at a stranger wearing the watch from the photograph and asked a question that brought a Mafia boss to his knees. The papers were already on the table when Elena arrived. She had dressed carefully that morning, not to impress him, not to wound him, but because her mother had once told her that the way you walk into a room that wants to diminish you says everything about who you are. So Elena wore the navy dress she had bought herself on the day she had finally stopped crying. She wore her hair natural, coiled and full at the crown the way she had stopped apologizing for years ago. She carried a small brown leather bag over one shoulder and held her daughter's hand with the other. The child was 4 years old and wore red shoes. The conference room on the 43rd floor of the Shin Tower had floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Han River. Elena had never been in this building before. She had never needed to be. Their marriage had existed in private rooms, in the apartment in Mapao, in the kitchen where Jiun had once burned rice so badly that they had both laughed until they couldn't stand up. She had not let herself think about that kitchen in a very long time. 3 lawyers sat on one side of the table. 2 of Ji-hoon's associates stood near the window with their arms folded. The air was the specific kind of cold that comes from powerful men who have decided how a thing will go before the other person enters the room. Elena sat down. She placed her bag on the floor, settled her daughter onto the chair beside her, and opened the brown leather folder she had brought without being asked. She did not look toward the door. She did not check the time. She simply waited, her hands resting flat on the table in front of her, the way a woman waits who has already survived the worst part. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "Mr. Shin will be just a moment." "I know," Elena said. She did not say it with heat. She did not say it with coldness. She said it the way you say something you simply know to be true, and the lawyer looked at her for a half-second longer than he intended to, then looked away. The little girl beside her was looking at everything, the windows, the lights, the water glasses set in a perfect line on the table. She was 4 years old, and the world was still a collection of beautiful, astonishing objects, and she had not yet learned to be afraid of rooms full of men who carried power like a second coat. Her name was Yuna. Elena had given her a Korean name because it had felt right, because the child had come from 2 worlds and belonged fully to both of them, and Elena had refused to cut off either half. She had raised Yuna in a small apartment above a Nigerian grocery store in the Incheon immigrant quarter, where the landlady brought them jollof of rice on Sundays, and the old Korean man across the hall had taught Yuna to count to 20 in Hangul by the time she was 3. Yuna had grown up eating both fufu and tak. She moved between languages the way water moves between spaces, finding the shape of whatever held her, losing nothing in the translation. The door opened. Elena did not look up immediately. She finished the sentence she was reading in the document before her, then raised her eyes. Ji-hoon Shin had not changed the way she had hoped he would, hollow, diminished, worn down by the years. He had changed the way she had feared, harder, quieter. The kind of still that comes not from peace, but from a man who has learned to keep every feeling locked behind a door with no handle on the inside. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit and a watch she recognized. The watch was silver with a worn leather band and a small crack in the crystal that he had never replaced because his father had given it to him the morning of his university entrance exam, and some things you keep even when they're broken. She had photographed that watch once in the early days. The photo still lived in the bottom drawer of her bedside table. Yuna saw it first. If the first CTA belongs anywhere, it belongs here, in the moment before the room changes, while you still believe you know how this ends. Like the story so far? Subscribe for more, leave a comment, hit like. This one has a long way left to go. Jun Shin sat at the head of the table and did not look at Elena directly. He looked at the papers. He adjusted his cuffs. He gave a small nod to the lead lawyer, who began to speak about asset settlements and the dissolution of the final marital tie. This meeting had apparently been scheduled because a previous document had not been properly notarized, a technical fault that had kept their legal status in a gray area for 5 years. 5 years. Elena had built an entire life in 5 years. She had learned to request maintenance without apologizing. She had learned which vegetables grew in the small box of soil she kept on her apartment balcony. She had learned that her daughter's laugh, high and sudden like a bell that surprises itself, was the most reliable medicine she had ever found for the particular loneliness of being excellent in a room where no one quite sees you. She was listening to the lawyer, but she was also peripherally watching Yuna. The child had gone very still. This was unusual. Yuna was not a still child. She climbed things and narrated her climbing. She had opinions about which direction to walk home. She had recently informed Elena that clouds were just sky thinking. Stillness in Yuna meant her attention had snagged on something. Elena followed her daughter's gaze. Yuna was looking at Jihoon's wrist, at the watch. Elena felt the particular cold that is not about temperature. She felt it begin at the back of her neck and travel slowly down. She had not prepared for this. She had prepared for the lawyers. She had prepared for Jihoon's silence. She had prepared for the moment she would sign her name one final time and close a chapter that had already been closed by pain and other people's choices long before she was invited to make it official. She had not prepared for her daughter to recognize a watch from a photograph that lived in a bedside drawer. "Mommy," Elena looked at her. Yuna's voice was a whisper, but in the hushed room it carried. "That watch," Yuna said. Elena said nothing. Her hand found her daughter's under the table. She pressed it gently, the press that meant, "Wait." Yuna knew that press. She had learned it in grocery stores when she was about to announce something loudly, and Elena needed her to hold the thought. But Yuna was already sliding off her chair. She was 4 years old, and she had not learned yet that some rooms are not for crossing. She walked around the corner of the table in her red shoes with the small buckles that Elena tightened every morning, and she stopped in front of Jihoon Shin, and she looked up at him with his own eyes. The very particular shade of dark that exists at the bottom of a river before the light finds it, and she asked, "Are you my dad?" The room went silent in the way that rooms go silent when something true and irreversible has just been said inside them. Jihoon Shin looked down at the child. He had the specific stillness of a man whose body has stopped before his mind has told it to, his jaw set. His hands, which had been resting on the table, went very slightly rigid at the knuckles. He was looking at the small person standing in front of him, and something was happening behind his eyes that he was working very hard not to let reach his face. Because she had his eyes, not similar his. The same depth, the same angle, the same way of looking directly at a thing without flinching. And she had his smile, the one that hadn't arrived yet, but lived already in the set of her mouth, in the potential of her. And on the side of her right hand, just below the knuckle of the index finger, there was a small oval birthmark the color of strong tea. His grandmother had had it, his uncle, his younger sister, his own hand bore the same mark in the same location. Jihoon Shin did not move, he did not speak. The lawyer said something. Elena did not hear what, and then Yuna, who had been studying this man with the watch and the familiar eyes with the patience of a child who has spent her whole life preparing a question, said, "Mommy said you couldn't come because bad people hurt your heart." One of the associates near the window made a small sound. The lead lawyer set down his pen. Elena was looking at her hands on the table, and she was not going to cry. She had decided this before she arrived, the way you decide things you intend to keep, but her throat had closed in a way that made breathing a deliberate act. Jihoon Shin's face broke, not dramatically, not with noise. It was the quiet kind of breaking, the kind that happens when a man who has spent years constructing walls encounters a 4-year-old who doesn't know what walls are for and walks straight through them in red shoes. His eyes went bright. He pressed his mouth together. He looked away from the child, toward the window, toward the Han River, toward anything that was not the small face looking up at him with complete trust and zero strategy. He breathed in, he breathed out, he looked back at Yuna. "Yes," he said, his voice was very quiet. "I think I am." Yuna considered this with the gravity of 4-year-olds encountering confirmed information. Then she said, "You have the same watch as the picture." She looked at the crack in the crystal with satisfaction as if a long-running hypothesis had finally been proven. Then she turned and walked back to her chair and climbed up and picked up the small crayon she had been carrying in her cardigan pocket and began to draw on the back of a legal document. Nobody stopped her. Nobody in that room spoke for a very long time. The meeting ended without the papers being signed. Jihoon had stood and said 3 words in Korean to his lead lawyer. Elena understood enough by now to know the words were, "Give me time," and then he had left the room without looking at her. Without looking at Yuna again, though Elena had seen his eyes go to the child one more time as he reached the door. The way you look at something you are afraid you will convince yourself you imagined. Elena gathered her daughter, her bag, and her cardigan, and she took the elevator down 43 floors in silence. In the lobby, Yuna said, "He looked sad." "He is," Elena said. "Because of the bad people?" Elena looked down at her daughter. The lobby was full of people in expensive suits moving between meetings that would shape the world. Yuna was watching her, crayons in one fist, with the patience of a child who has learned that some questions take time. Yes, Elena said, because of the bad people and because of choices. And because things that aren't anyone's fault can still do a lot of damage. Yuna thought about this. Then she said, I drew him a picture, it's the three of us. I gave him a happy face even though he looked sad. She held up the paper from the conference room. Elena looked at it for a long moment. 3 figures, a tall one, a medium one, a small one. All of them with circular heads and large smiles. The tall one had a square on its wrist that was apparently a watch. Elena folded it carefully and put it in her bag. That night, after Yuna was asleep, Elena sat on the floor of the small balcony with a cup of tea going cold in her hands, and she permitted herself 10 minutes of feeling everything she had spent 5 years learning not to feel. She permitted herself the grief of the kitchen in Mapo. The grief of the morning she had discovered she was pregnant and had felt, for exactly 45 seconds before reality arrived, completely and perfectly happy. The grief of being 28 years old and alone in a foreign country with a growing belly and no map for any of it. She did not permit herself to hope. Hope, she had learned, was a thing you had to be careful with. You had to know its limits. You had to know when you were holding it, and when it was holding you, and know the difference before it became the kind of thing that made decisions for you. She went inside when the tea was cold. In the bottom drawer of her bedside table, she did not look at the photograph. Ji-hoon Shin did not sleep that night. He sat in his study on the 22nd floor of his private residence, and he looked at nothing, and he thought about everything. He thought about a small girl with his eyes who had walked across a conference room in red shoes and dismantled him completely with a single sentence. He thought about the birthmark. He thought about the way Elena had sat at that table, still prepared, costing him nothing with her grief, showing him only the flat surface of a woman who had decided to survive without his help. He had expected anger. He had been prepared for anger. He had written responses in his head for 5 years to the accusations he deserved. The abandonment, the failure to investigate, the speed with which he had believed the worst about a woman who had never given him reason to doubt her. He had a whole architecture of guilt built for Elena's anger to occupy. What he had not built was anything for her silence, for the way she had simply sat there, for the way she had not said, "Look what you missed, look what you cost me, look what your people took from us." She hadn't said any of it. She had just brought the child to the meeting and sat down. He poured a measure of whiskey and set it on the desk and did not touch it. His right-hand man, Min-jun, knocked twice and entered without waiting, which was the agreement they had established years ago, because Ji-hoon had once told him that a man who waits for permission doesn't give you real information fast enough. "You need to see this," Min-jun said. He set a folder on the desk. Ji-hoon did not touch it immediately. He looked at Min-jun, who had been with him for 6 years, who had managed his schedule and his security and his internal communications since the year everything had collapsed. "What is it, the original reports?" Min-jun said. "From 5 years ago. The ones about Elena." Ji-hoon's hand moved toward the folder and then stopped. "Who flagged them?" "I did. After today's meeting, something didn't sit right." Min-jun paused. "I ran the file numbers against the internal archive. The metadata doesn't match. The creation dates on 2 of the key documents were altered. Someone backdated fabricated evidence." Ji-hoon sat very still. "The source?" he said. "Han Seo-jun." The name landed in the room like something heavy dropped from a height. Han Seo-jun, who had been his right hand before Min-jun. Han Seo-jun, who had presented the evidence that Elena had been sharing information about Ji-hoon's operations with a rival family. Han Seo-jun, who had been promoted to a senior position in the Shin family's legitimate business arm 6 months after the divorce. A promotion that had come from Ji-hoon's father, not from Ji-hoon himself. And the Kwan family, Min-jun continued quietly. They were connected to Seo-jun. Their daughter was already being positioned as a match for you before the evidence was fabricated. The timeline tracks. Ji-hoon looked at the folder. He looked at the untouched whiskey. He looked at the window where the city moved below him in a river of light, indifferent and continuous. "Leave me," he said. Min-jun left. Ji-hoon sat alone with the truth of what had been done. Not to him, but to Elena, who had been 27 years old and newly pregnant and had been removed from his life by people who feared what she represented. She had been the one thing that made him less purely the Empire. She had been the one person whose opinion of him had mattered more than power, and so they had removed her, and he had let them. He had believed what was put in front of him, because it was easier than believing that the people around him were capable of that specific betrayal. He had been wrong. He had been catastrophically, completely wrong. He picked up his phone. He looked at Elena's number for a long time, then he put the phone back down. She had given him her number only for the logistical communications about the finalization meeting. She had not given it to him for this. She had not given it to him to receive an apology at midnight from a man she owed nothing. He would find another way. The surveillance team he assigned was careful and respectful. He had given very specific instructions about that. He didn't want eyes on Elena. He wanted eyes on the neighborhood, on the roots, on the people who moved around the community where she and Una lived. What he learned in 2 weeks reconstructed her life in a way that made his chest feel like it was doing something architectural and unpleasant. She worked as a medical interpreter and translator for a hospital in the Incheon district. She went to work at 7:40 in the morning after walking Una to a neighborhood daycare run by a woman named Mrs. O, who had 3 grandchildren and who gave Una a small bowl of barley tea every morning while Elena was still in the doorway. She came home at 5:30 most evenings with groceries from the market 2 streets over. On Tuesdays, she went to a community center where she taught basic Korean language and documentation navigation to other African and Southeast Asian immigrants. On Saturdays, she cleaned the apartment of the elderly man across the hall, whose name was Mr. Bake and who paid her in persimmons from his sister's farm and the kind of dignified gratitude that older Korean men offer when they are too proud to accept help easily. She was building something. It was small and careful and threaded through with connection, and she had done all of it herself, out of whatever she had when there was nothing. Mr. Bake, Ji-hoon's team reported this almost as a footnote, had been having trouble with an unpaid medical bill that had gone to collections. A clerical error from the previous year. Ji-hoon had it resolved in 48 hours anonymously. Through a charity fund that didn't trace, he told himself it was not about Elena. He knew it was about Elena. The second thing that required attention was the parking garage 2 blocks from Una's daycare. 3 men from a local gang had been using it to pressure shop owners in the market street for protection payments. One of the shops was the Nigerian grocery store whose owner had given Elena and Una a discount on plantains every week and who kept a small bottle of palm oil behind the counter that Elena had told Una was the smell of your grandmother's kitchen. A grandmother Una had never met in Lagos, who sent voice messages on Elena's phone that Una listened to with the concentrated attention she gave to important things. The gang situation was handled in 3 days. Nobody in the community knew how. One morning the men were simply not there, and a week later someone anonymous had paid for new lighting fixtures in the parking structure and a security camera that pointed at the entrance. Elena heard about it from Mrs. O, who heard about it from the grocery store owner. Elena said, "That's good news." And then she went home and put Una to bed and sat on the balcony and thought about the particular texture of coincidence. She was not naive. She had never been naive. She had simply learned to choose which things she interrogated and which things she allowed to be what they appeared to be, because constant interrogation was its own kind of exhaustion. She allowed this to appear to be good news for now. He came to the daycare pickup 14 days after the conference room. Elena was signing Una's exit sheet at the small desk near the door when she heard Mrs. O make a sound that was not alarm but was not quite ordinary, the sound of someone adjusting their expectations in real time. She turned. Ji-hoon Shin was standing outside the daycare's glass door in a gray coat, no driver, no associates. He was looking at the building with the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere and is not sure of the correct way to proceed, which was an expression she had never seen on his face before. She had seen him in boardrooms, at family dinners that felt like sieges, across a kitchen table at 2 in the morning when neither of them could sleep. She had never seen him uncertain about the geometry of a situation. She went to the door and opened it. He said, "I should have called." "Yes," she said. "I wanted to see her." "I don't." He stopped. Looked at the ground. Looked at her. "I didn't know how to ask." "I'm still not sure I have the right to ask." Elena looked at him for a moment that stretched. Behind her, Una was putting on her shoes with the focused determination of a child who had opinions about which foot went first. "You don't have rights yet," Elena said. "Rights are built. You can have a chance." Something moved across his face. It was not relief. It was more complicated than relief. It was the expression of a man who had just been given something he wasn't sure he knew how to hold without breaking it. "Una," Elena said without turning. "Come say hello." There was the sound of small feet, and then Una appeared at Elena's side, one shoe buckled and one shoe not, looking up at Ji-hoon with the frank assessment that 4-year-olds apply to everything. "You came back," Una said. "Yes," Ji-hoon said. "Did the bad people stop hurting your heart?" Ji-hoon crouched down so he was at her level. It was a thing Elena had not expected, that he would know to do that, to come down to her instead of requiring her to look up. She watched him do it and added it to the small, dangerous ledger she was keeping. "I'm working on it," he said. Yuna studied him. She reached out and touched the watch. Ji-hoon went very still, the way you go still when something small and true makes contact. "Mommy said this watch was in the picture," Yuna said. She remembered right. "Can I see the crack?" Ji-hoon turned his wrist. Yuna looked at the crack in the crystal with the gravity of a small scholar. "I have one on my cup," she said. "Mommy says it still works." Ji-hoon looked up at Elena over the child's head. Elena met his eyes. She held them for 1 second, enough to let him know she was looking at him clearly, that she was not fooled by the gesture even if she was moved by it, and then she looked away. "We're going to the market," she told him. "You can walk with us if you want. But this is not," she stopped, but chose her words, "this is not an agreement. This is a walk to the market." "Understood," Ji-hoon said. He walked with them to the market. He carried the groceries without being asked. He did not try to talk to Elena beyond what was natural. He answered Yuna's questions. She had many about the city, about which buildings were the tallest, about whether fish were cold when they were alive or only after, with a patience that Elena catalogued quietly and added nothing to. She was not going to let herself read meaning into patience. Patience could be performed. She had been around powerful men long enough to know what they were willing to sustain when they wanted something. But she watched. Ji-hoon's investigation into the fabricated evidence took 3 weeks and involved people he had not spoken to in years. He called in favors from sources he had believed were closed. He had Minjun trace financial records across 4 shell accounts. He had a former data analyst pull archived communications from the period before Elena's departure. The picture that assembled itself was specific and ugly. Han Seo-jun had been in contact with Kwon Tae-young, the patriarch of the Kwon family, whose daughter had been positioned as Ji-hoon's next match, for 14 months before the manufactured evidence had appeared. The plan had been patient and long constructed. They had found a real moment of weakness. A business meeting Elena had attended with Ji-hoon at which a rival representative had also been present, and had layered false documentation around it until it looked like coordination. It had taken 11 minutes for Ji-hoon to destroy his marriage on the strength of it. He sat with that number. 11 minutes. That was how long the meeting had taken. How long it had taken him to believe the worst. How long it had taken for 5 years of separation to become possible. He had Han Seo-jun brought to him directly. He did not describe what happened in that room. This story will not go there. What matters is what came after. That Ji-hoon walked out with the full record of what had been done. That he presented it to his father without softening, and that for the first time in his adult life, the Shin family patriarch was silent in a way that was not power, but was something closer to shame. "She had nothing to do with it," Ji-hoon said. "She was pregnant when she left. She raised my daughter alone for 5 years in a 1-bedroom apartment above a grocery store. She taught Korean to immigrants on her day off. She has never said a word against me to the child." "Not one word." His father looked at the table. "I will fix it," Ji-hoon said. "Not for you, not for the family. Because it's the right thing, and because it is the only honest thing left to do." He went to Elena's apartment that evening. He had not planned what to say. He had found in the past several weeks that planning what to say to Elena was largely useless because she heard the architecture of things rather than the surface, and whatever he constructed she would see through with a precision that was not cruelty, but was the specific clarity of a woman who had stopped having the luxury of comfortable fictions. She opened the door before he could knock a second time. She was holding a small pan. Yuna was visible in the kitchen behind her, standing on a step stool at the counter with a serious expression. "We're making eggs," Elena said. "I know. I'm sorry to come without." "Come in," she said. "Yuna will be thrilled. She's been telling Mrs. O about her dad and I would like some third-party evidence." He came in. The apartment was small and warm and smelled of cooking oil and something floral that was probably a candle. It was not decorated for someone else's eyes. It was decorated for living in, which meant there were drawings taped to the kitchen wall at 4-year-old height, and a pair of Elena's shoes near the door with one leaning on the other, and a book on the kitchen counter with a boarding pass being used as a bookmark from a flight that had clearly happened years ago. Yuna said, "You can stir," and handed him a spoon. Ji-hoon stirred the eggs. They ate at the small table by the window with the city quiet outside. Yuna talked about daycare and a dispute she'd had with a boy named Byung-ho about whether dinosaurs had been afraid of anything, and her position, forcefully held, was that they had not been, Because what would scare a dinosaur? Ji-hoon said he thought a very large wave might have been worrying. Yuna considered this and said, maybe. Byung-ho says meteors. But meteors are not alive, so I don't think that's being scared. She argues philosophy at dinner every night, Elena said, and there was something in the way she said it. Not performed, not for his benefit, just the genuine exhausted affection of a mother who has raised an intellectual, that made him look at her for a moment longer than dinner required. She did not look back. She was looking at Yuna, but the corner of her mouth was doing something. After dinner, after Yuna had been put to bed, Ji-hoon had read her 2 stories at her insistence, one about a rabbit and one about a ship, and she had fallen asleep mid-sentence about the ship's captain. Elena made tea, and they sat at opposite ends of the small couch, and she said, "Tell me what you found," he told her. All of it he did not minimize and he did not editorialize. He went through the timeline, the fabrication, the motivations, the Kwan family connection, what he had done about it. He spoke for 19 minutes, and she listened without interrupting, which was a discipline he remembered from before. That Elena listened with her whole attention in a way that made you feel both seen and accountable. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "Not all of it," she clarified. "But I knew something had been constructed. I knew because I knew myself, and because—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, "because the man who believed it in 11 minutes was not the man I had thought I married. So I had to decide which was real, the evidence or the man, and I decided I'd been wrong about the man." She said it without self-pity, without recrimination, as a simple fact, a decision she had made and lived with. It was easier than the alternative. If I'd kept believing in you, I would have waited, and I couldn't wait. "I had Yuna to think about." Ji-hoon set down his teacup. "You didn't just divorce me," Elena said. "You abandoned us when we needed you most. I know you didn't know. I know what was done to you. And I'm telling you that knowing doesn't change the shape of what happened. It changes what's possible now. But it doesn't undo the shape." He sat with that. He did not defend himself. He did not try to move toward absolution faster than she was willing to go. "What do you need from me?" he said. She looked at him. Her eyes were very steady. "Yuna needs a father," she said, "not a resource, not a name. A person who shows up, who's consistent, who learns her arguments about dinosaurs, who understands that she comes first before anything else in either of our lives." "Yes," he said. "And I need," she stopped, started again. "I need to trust you, and I don't yet. And I'm not going to pretend I do to make this more comfortable. I don't want you to pretend." "I know," she said. And this time, briefly, she looked at him with something that was not yet trust, but was at least its precondition, honesty, held steady between them in the quiet of a small apartment with a sleeping child in the next room. He came every Tuesday and every Saturday. On Tuesdays, he picked Yuna up from daycare and walked her home, buying her a small steamed bun from the cart at the corner that she had apparently been eyeing with intent for months and that Mrs. O considered a reasonable dessert, and Elena considered a negotiation she had decided not to have. On Saturdays, he came at 9 in the morning, and sometimes they went to the park, and sometimes he stayed in the apartment, and he and Yuna did things that he was clearly learning to do in real time. Origami from a book he had bought at the stationery shop on the corner, the rules of a card game Yuna had invented, and whose rules changed whenever she was losing. He did not push toward Elena. This was noticed. She watched him not push. She watched him talk to Yuna with genuine attention. She watched him learn that Yuna liked her pancakes with honey, not syrup, and that she needed 30 seconds of quiet after waking up before any conversation was possible, and that she was deeply attached to a stuffed rabbit named General Cho who was missing one eye and must be respected accordingly. The pancakes happened on a Saturday in the 3rd month. He had arrived early, and Elena had been on a call with a patient from the hospital. A long and complicated interpretation for a Yoruba-speaking family navigating a difficult diagnosis. She had gestured toward the kitchen. "Yuna needs breakfast. I'll be another 20 minutes. She had not expected him to know how to cook anything. She had barely expected him to know where anything was in a kitchen that was not his own. When she came out of the bedroom 20 minutes later, Yuna was sitting at the table with a plate of pancakes and the small blue ceramic jug that held the honey, and Ji-hoon was at the stove with a dish towel over his shoulder, reading the back of the oat flour bag with the focused expression of a man who is consulting a source document. "Honey, not syrup," he said without turning around. "She told me twice in case I forgot." Elena stood in the doorway for a moment and said nothing. There was a cup of tea on the counter, her exact preferred temperature, not boiling, just below. She had never told him. He must have watched. She picked up the tea. She sat at the table with her daughter. She did not say thank you out loud in that moment because she didn't trust what else might come out if she opened that particular door. But she looked at the cup in her hands, and she allowed it to cost her something. That was the crack. She didn't say anything about it to herself that night, but it was there. He called Una every evening at 8 o'clock after her bath before her stories. The call lasted between 4 and 11 minutes depending on Una's material. He learned to let her lead. He learned to receive updates about Byung-ho's latest erroneous positions. He learned that the correct response to, "Guess what I dreamed," was not to guess but to say, "Tell me," because the telling was the point. One evening Elena answered the call instead of Una. "She's brushing her teeth," she said. "Give her a second." "Okay," he said. There was a pause. "She calls you every night now," Elena said. It wasn't an accusation. "Yes, she called you when she couldn't sleep last week. Before she came to get me." A longer pause. "Is that," he started. "It's good," Elena said. "I just wanted you to know I noticed." Another pause. Then he said very quietly, "Elena, Una's coming," she said, and handed the phone to her daughter. But she had heard the way he said her name. She heard the weight of it. She filed it carefully under, "Not yet," and went to fold the laundry. There was one evening she was not supposed to see. It was a Saturday in the 4th month, and Una had fallen asleep in the middle of a park visit. She did this sometimes, horizontal on the grass, with the total confidence of a child who trusts that someone will carry her home. And Ji-hoon had picked her up without hesitation and carried her back to the apartment, and Elena had laid her in bed, and they had both stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the sleeping child the way parents stand who haven't yet admitted they're parents together. Elena had gone to the kitchen to start dinner. Ji-hoon had said he would leave, that he didn't want to intrude. She had said he could stay if he wanted. She said it carefully, in the voice that was not an invitation but was not a closed door either. He had stayed. She had been cutting vegetables when she heard him in the living room, and she looked through the kitchen pass-through, and he was sitting on the floor, not on the couch, on the floor, with his back against the wall and his forearms on his knees, and he was holding his phone and looking at nothing. He was not performing for anyone. Una was asleep. Elena had not announced her line of sight. He was just there, in the particular posture of a man who has been carrying something for a very long time and has sat down for a moment because the kitchen door was half open and no one was looking. He looked exhausted, not the performing kind of tired that powerful men wear when they want sympathy, the real kind. The kind that settles into the body when the adrenaline of a life built on dominance finally has nowhere to go. He looked like someone who had run a long race in a direction he had believed in completely, and had arrived at the finish line to find it was not where he had meant to go. Elena set down the knife. She looked at him through the pass-through for one unguarded moment. He didn't know she was watching. He ran a hand over his face. He looked at his phone for a few more seconds, and then he locked the screen and set it face down on the floor. He closed his eyes. He breathed. It was the most honest thing she had seen from him in 5 years. Possibly in all the years before. She picked up the knife and went back to cutting vegetables and said nothing about it. Not that evening, and not ever. Some things you see that are not meant for the room. You hold them carefully, and you don't turn them into ammunition, and you don't turn them into permission. But they do their work on you, in the space underneath language, in the place where decisions grow before you've named them. The 5th month brought the trouble she hadn't prepared for. It came from inside her. It was a Wednesday night. Not a Tuesday, not a Saturday, which meant Una had not seen Ji-hoon that day and had been asking about him at dinner with the specific frequency that small children apply to things they love and miss. Elena had answered patiently, "He'll come Saturday, and yes, he's working." And no, he didn't forget you. He wouldn't forget you. She had said that last one and felt the ground shift under her slightly, because she had meant it. She had said it without the protective distance she had been maintaining. She had said it the way you say something you actually believe. After Una was asleep, Elena sat on the bathroom floor with her back against the tub. She did this sometimes when the apartment felt too small and she needed a room that was just a room, just 4 walls with no windows and no view of anything she had to navigate. She sat there and she thought, what am I doing? Not the surface version of that question, the real one, the one underneath. She had let him in, carefully, measuredly, with all the guardrails in place. She had watched him earn Una's trust, and she had been moved by it genuinely, because Una's trust was not a small thing, and Una gave it to people who deserved it with an accuracy that Elena trusted more than her own reading sometimes. But the question was not whether he was earning it. The question was what came after, because she knew herself. She knew that the tea on the counter at exactly the right temperature was already inside her in a way she hadn't authorized. She knew that the way he said her name on the phone that one evening had gone somewhere she hadn't designated for it. She knew that the thing she was calling caution was starting to look, from the inside, a lot like fear. And the fear was not of him. The fear was of herself, of what it meant if she let this become what it was already becoming. Because she was still the woman who had spent 3 weeks after Yuna's birth crying in a hospital in Incheon with no one beside her. She was still the woman who had filed every form alone and negotiated every difficult conversation with the landlord alone and had held her daughter through fevers alone at 3 in the morning. She had built herself from that. She had built a self that did not require rescue, that did not lean, that was not dependent on the continuity of anyone else's presence. If she let him in, all the way in, she was risking that self. She sat on the bathroom floor for a long time. She thought about Yuna calling him before she came to get her. She thought about that as evidence of what she might be about to lose if she pushed him away. Not her own self-sufficiency, which no one could take, but Yuna's access to a father who was learning slowly and earnestly to be present. She thought about the photograph in the drawer. She had kept it for 5 years. She had kept it when she had every reason to throw it out. She had kept it because she had needed Yuna to know that her father was not a villain, that the world was complicated, that love and damage could live in the same history without one canceling the other. But she had also, honestly, and this was the part she sat on the bathroom floor to admit, she had also kept it because she had never entirely stopped. She was 43 days from allowing herself to use that word. But she was there on the bathroom floor looking at it. She could call everything off. Arrange for Ji-hoon to have formal scheduled visits with Yuna through proper channels, rebuild the distance. Protect herself. She sat with that option for a long time. She did not make the call. She went to bed instead. She thought, you have time. You don't have to decide tonight. But she also thought, you already know what you're deciding. And the bathroom floor is where you come when you already know. She slept. Yuna began calling every evening at 8 o'clock on her own. This had started in the 4th month as something that happened when Elena handed her the phone and had evolved gradually, then completely, into something Yuna initiated herself from the small step stool she dragged to the kitchen counter because that's where she stood to call people. She stood on the step stool with the phone pressed to her ear, and her expression was very serious in the way that people are serious about things they love. "Good night, Dad," she said every night. Ji-hoon had told Elena this was the thing, not a thing, the thing. He had told her on a Saturday when Yuna was at Mrs. O's with the grandchildren, and they were briefly, for the first time, alone in the apartment together, without a 4-year-old as both bridge and buffer. He said it quietly, looking at the kitchen counter, not at her. "When she calls me that, when she says good night, I don't know how to explain what that does," Elena said. "You don't have to explain it." He looked at her. "I know what it does," she said. "I've been watching." They were standing on opposite sides of the kitchen counter. The distance between them was not accidental. They had both, independently, and then together without discussing it, established a physical geography in the apartment that had gradations. The doorway was greeting distance. The couch was conversation distance. The kitchen counter was something else, closer than the couch, with the counter between them still, a last geography of almost. Ji-hoon set his hands flat on the counter. Elena looked at them, at the watch, at the birthmark near the knuckle that matched their daughter's. "I'm not going to pretend I know what this is yet," she said. "But I'm also not pretending it's just about Yuna." He didn't move toward her. He didn't close the distance. He looked at her with everything he was carrying in his face, visible, unperformed. "Tell me what you need," he said. "More time," she said. "Yes, and for you to not push." "I'm not pushing." "I know," she said. "That's part of why I'm saying this." They stood there for another moment on either side of the counter, in the particular tension of two people who know what's happening and have chosen, together, not to arrive at it too fast. Then the door opened and Yuna came in from Mrs. O's with a persimmon in each hand and announced that she had learned to do a cartwheel and would demonstrate immediately. The counter distance broke. They both moved into the living room. The call came on a Thursday in the 6th month at 11:47 at night. Minjun's voice was steady in the specific way it went steady when things were serious. "They know about the family, Ji-hoon." "The PO group." Someone talked. "They know about the apartment." Ji-hoon was already on his feet. The PIO group was a rival organization that had been positioning against the Shin Empire for 2 years. They had seen Ji-hoon's withdrawal from certain operations, the reduction of his active role in the enforcement arm, the divestment from several revenue streams, the changes in his scheduling that came from spending Tuesday and Saturday afternoons with a 4-year-old, as weakness, as opening. They had found the apartment through a contact in the community surveillance network. Someone had talked. Someone had connected Ji-hoon's presence in the Incheon immigrant quarter to Elena's address. Ji-hoon made 4 calls in under 3 minutes. The 5th call was to Elena. She answered on the 2nd ring, voice level, because she was Elena, and she answered the phone at midnight the same way she answered everything. Get Yuna and move to the back room now. Lock the interior door. Don't open anything for anyone until I call you again. A pause. Then, how bad? Working on it. Go now, she went. He knew she went because he heard the footsteps, heard the door, heard the click of the lock, heard nothing else because she was not someone who made noise when she was afraid. The situation was contained in 40 minutes by the security team he had positioned without telling Elena, and later this would become a conversation, and it would not be simple. 2 men from the Pio group had been intercepted 3 streets from the apartment. No one was hurt. The street had been cleared. Ji-hoon arrived at the apartment at 12:42. Elena opened the door with Yuna on her hip. The child was half asleep, confused, clutching General Cho. Elena's face was completely composed. This was the thing about her that he had been watching for months and still could not entirely absorb, that her composure was not distance. It was the opposite. It was a woman who had learned to function inside fear because the alternative was unavailable to her. She had been doing it for 5 years. She okay? He said. Frightened. She's fine. Elena looked at him. And you fine, Ji-hoon fine, he said again. And then, because she was looking at him the way she looked at things she intended to see clearly. Shaken. I'm shaken, she nodded. She let him in. He sat in the kitchen while Elena settled Yuna back to sleep. He sat at the small table and he looked at the drawings on the wall at 4-year-old height, and at the boarding pass bookmark in Elena's book, and at the 2 remaining persimmons in the bowl that Mr. Bake had given, and he thought about the particular shape of what he had built and what it had cost and what it continued to cost the people around him. Elena came back. She sat down across from him. They found the apartment, he said. I heard you on the phone. This is my world. It will keep finding you. He looked at the table. I have been telling myself that I can manage it, that I can keep you separate, that the protection I have in place is enough. He stopped. Tentai told me something different. Elena was quiet. I won't let you and Yuna be in danger because of me, he said. I won't live with that. What are you saying? He looked at her. I'm going to step down, he said. From everything, the silence that followed was not the absence of sound. It was something more textured. The silence of a woman who is taking in information that is larger than she had expected, and processing it with the same steadiness she processes everything. That's not a small thing, she said. No, your family, your organization. Everything you've built. Yes, they'll think you're weak. They already do. I stopped caring about that around the 4th Tuesday, he said. When Yuna explained to me for 20 minutes why General Cho needed to have surgery for his eye, and I was more interested in that conversation than anything I'd dealt with all week. Elena looked at him for a long moment. You can't do this for us, she said. You have to do it for yourself or it won't hold. I know, he met her eyes. It's for myself, the family, the power. I built all of it because I didn't know what else to do with the person I was. I don't want to be that person anymore. I haven't wanted to be that person since a 4-year-old walked across a conference room and asked me a question. Elena pressed her lips together. Give me until morning to think, she said. Take whatever you need. She stood. She looked down at him for a moment. At the watch, at his hands, at the man who had arrived in her life 6 months ago like a problem she hadn't budgeted for, and had since become something else entirely, something she didn't yet have the right word for. Sleep on the couch, she said, in case they come back. She went to bed. He slept on the couch. It took 37 days from that night to complete. The transition of power within the Shin organization was not a simple thing. There were negotiations, structural arrangements, the establishment of legitimate successor leadership under a framework that Ji-hoon and Min-jun had actually spent 3 months quietly preparing. The Thursday attack had accelerated the timeline, not initiated the plan. Ji-hoon had been working toward this before he admitted it to himself. His father said nothing useful. His extended family said a great deal that was also not useful. 3 of his senior associates resigned. 2 came to him privately and said he'd been waiting for someone to do this. The media called him weak. The business press called it a restructuring. The criminal press, the informal networks of information that move through those worlds, called it the end of an era. Ji-hoon read none of it. He was at the daycare pickup on Tuesday. The day the formal transition was completed, a Thursday in the 8th month, the day Ji-hoon Shin officially ceased to be the operational head of the Shin Empire, Yuna called him at 8 o'clock from her step stool in the kitchen. "Good night, Dad," she said. "Good night, baby," he said. He sat in his newly rented apartment, small, in the Mapo district, near the Han River, which he had chosen because it was the neighborhood where he had once burned rice badly, and they had both laughed until they couldn't stand. And he felt the specific quiet of a man who has put something large down after carrying it for a long time. It was not peaceful immediately. The withdrawal from power, like any withdrawal, had a texture that was not comfortable. He filled the time with things he had never learned. He learned to cook rice properly. He learned which vegetables grew from seed and which required a start. He started running in the mornings along the river path, not because he was training for anything, but because his body needed somewhere to put the energy that had previously gone into surveillance and strategy and the management of danger. He applied for a food handling certificate because he had an idea that was still forming. He didn't tell Elena yet. Elena, for her part, was watching. She was watching the way you watch something that you have decided to believe in, but have not yet given yourself full permission to believe in. She was watching the Tuesday pickups continue and the Saturday visits continue, and the 8 o'clock calls continue through a transition that would have given most men a reason to cancel things, to delay, to say, "I'm handling something. I'll make it up to you." Ji-hoon had not canceled one Tuesday. He had not been late to one Saturday. She was watching, and she was letting what she saw reach her. Mrs. O told her in the 9th month, "That man is in love with you. He doesn't look at you the way men look at women they used to be married to. He looks at you the way men look at things they're afraid they'll lose," Elena said. Mrs. O said, "I'm 81. I get to say things." Elena went home and sat on the balcony and thought about the boarding pass in the book and the tea at the right temperature, and the fact that she had, at some point in the past several months, stopped looking at the photograph in the drawer because she didn't need it anymore. He told her about the restaurant idea on a Saturday in the 10th month while Yuna was at the park with Mr. Bake's sister, who had come from the farm and had taken a liking to the child with the velocity of women of a certain age who have decided a child is worth investing in. They were at the kitchen table. He had made coffee. He had learned her preferred preparation, strong, small, 1 sugar added at the end. He set it in front of her and sat down. "I want to open a restaurant," he said. Elena looked at him, small. "Near the sea, there's a commercial space in Incheon I've been looking at, Korean West African fusion. I've been experimenting with the combinations." He looked at the table. "You'd have to tell me what's authentic and what's wrong. I've been working from recipes online and I don't fully trust myself." Elena looked at her coffee. "You're serious," she said. "I've never been more serious about anything that didn't involve doing something I'm ashamed of." She heard the weight of that and did not look away from it. "A Korean West African restaurant," she said. "For the community you built here," he said. "The people who came from somewhere else and built something anyway. The people who eat jollof rice and kimchi out of the same week and don't see the contradiction because there is none." He stopped. "And because Yuna switches between languages like breathing. And I want her to grow up in a place that was made for the version of her that exists." Elena put her coffee down. She looked at him across the kitchen table. She looked at the man he was now, not the man from the conference room, not the man from the photograph, not the man she had married or divorced or grieved. This man. The one sitting at her kitchen table, having learned her exact coffee preparation and bought a food handling certificate and was telling her about a restaurant he wanted to build for their daughter's specific, irreducible wholeness. "You'd need a partner," she said. "Someone who knows the West African side." "I know. I have a full-time job. We'd figure it out." A pause. "Ji-hoon," he looked at her. "I need you to know if this goes forward, any of it, I'm not doing it because I owe it to you or because I feel like I should. I'm doing it because I want to. And that's the only reason I'm willing to do it. That's the only reason I want," he said. She reached across the table. She did not take his hand. She placed her hand on the table near his, near enough to be intentional, far enough to leave him room to understand what near enough meant. He looked at her hand. He turned his palm up. She placed her hand in his. It was the simplest thing. It was the size of everything. Elena's mother landed at Incheon Airport on a Tuesday in the 12th month. She had not been to Korea before. She was 63 years old, had raised 5 children alone in Lagos after Elena's father passed, and had that specific quality of presence that some older women carry, the kind that enters a room and rearranges it slightly without moving anything. Yuna had never met her in person. They had a relationship built from voice messages and video calls, and the packages that arrived 3 times a year with fabric and spices, and a handwritten note in English and Yoruba that Elena read to Yuna, who listened with complete seriousness. At the airport arrivals hall, when Yuna saw her grandmother come through the doors, the child made a sound that Elena had never heard from her before. Not a shout, not a call, but something lower and more primal, the sound of recognition at a level beneath language, and she ran. Elena's mother caught her. She held Yuna against her chest and closed her eyes and said something in Yoruba that Elena understood and did not translate, because some things are not for translation. They are for the people they belong to. Elena stood a few feet away and watched and felt something settle in her that had been held tense for 5 years. This was the thread that had run beneath everything. Not Ji-hoon, not the divorce, not even Yuna's well-being, which had been addressed in increments. This was it, her mother seeing her daughter. Her mother holding the child who had been born in a hospital room without her, in a country far away, into a life that had not gone the way anyone planned. Her mother looked up over Yuna's shoulder and found Elena's eyes. She nodded once. Elena nodded back. Ji-hoon was standing slightly behind Elena. He had driven them to the airport without being asked, and had stayed near the car, and had come to stand behind Elena only because Elena had turned and found him and moved slightly to make room beside her. He was holding the small bag with the extra sweater for Yuna in case the airport was cold. Elena's mother looked at him. She looked at him for a long time with the assessment of a woman who has raised children and buried a husband and survived things that do not require listing. Then she said in English, "You have work to do." "Yes, Ma," Ji-hoon said. Something shifted in the older woman's face. She had not expected that response. She had perhaps expected defense or assertion. She had received acknowledgement. She inclined her head, very slightly. It was not forgiveness. It was the first layer of a long and necessary process. It was enough for today. Elena felt it land in her chest like a door being unlocked from the inside. The restaurant opened on a Thursday afternoon in early spring, 7 months later. It was small, 12 tables, an open kitchen, walls painted the color of warm stone, with a mural that Yuna had helped design, featuring a map of 2 coastlines and a child standing between them with one hand in each sea. The menu had been tested and argued over and revised 17 times. The jollof-style rice served alongside doenjang jjigae. The egusi kimchi fusion that had caused 3 weeks of respectful disagreement until Elena's mother and Mrs. O had been consulted simultaneously and had reached, to everyone's surprise, rapid consensus. The suya-spiced grilled pork that Yuna had named the good meat, and which had remained on the menu under that exact name because no one could argue with it. The sign above the door read, "Yuna's," not because the restaurant was about her, because everything they had made, carefully, slowly, from what remained after the worst of it was. It was a Thursday evening, 5 months after the opening. The restaurant was full. A group of women from the community center Elena still taught on Tuesdays had come for a birthday, and 3 Korean families from the neighborhood had become regulars, and the Nigerian grocery store owner had a standing reservation on the first Saturday of every month. Yuna was 5 years old now, and she helped on the evenings her grandmother visited by bringing menus to tables and asking customers in Korean or English, or a combination of both, whether they had allergies, a question she had decided was very important and delivered with great gravity. She came into the kitchen during a quiet moment between the first and second service. Ji-hoon was at the stove. Elena was at the small desk in the corner with the evening's orders. Yuna climbed up on the step stool they kept in the kitchen, the same step stool from the apartment, brought over because Yuna had been specific about its necessity. And she looked at Ji-hoon with the expression she wore when something important was being considered. "Daddy," she said. "Yes, do you miss being powerful?" Ji-hoon set down the spoon. He looked at his daughter on the step stool. He looked at Elena at the desk, who had looked up from her papers and was watching him with the steady gaze that saw everything. He smiled. It was the smile that lived in the potential of Yuna's face, the one Elena had catalogued on the first day and carried like something important. He reached across and took Elena's hand where it rested on the desk. She let him take it. She turned her palm and held on. "I already have everything I fought for," he said. Yuna looked at their joined hands. She looked at the mural on the wall, the child between 2 coastlines. She looked at the restaurant full of people eating food that belonged to both of the worlds she came from. She picked up a menu. Okay, she said, satisfied. I'm going to go ask the birthday table about allergies. She climbed down and went. Elena watched her go. Then she looked at Ji-hoon. He was already looking at her. This story began with a divorce that was supposed to be the end, with papers on a table and lawyers with folded arms and a silence where love used to be. It ended here, not with a rescue or a reversal, but with something that was built slowly, honestly, from the rubble, by two people who had reason not to try and tried anyway. Love didn't save him instantly. It changed him slowly, until he became a man worthy of his family again. And she, who had never needed saving, chose him anyway, not because she had to, not because the story required it, because she wanted to, and that was the whole of it. If this story moved you, if you stayed until the end, if you felt the weight of that small hand in the big one, if you heard Yuna saying goodnight from a kitchen step stool somewhere in your chest, please leave a comment below. Tell me which moment got you. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next one. Like if this was worth your evening. Every one of those things tells the algorithm that this kind of story deserves to exist, and it means more than you know. See you in the next one.